Tonight we slip past the heavy wooden gate of a long-forgotten abbey, its stones sweating mist beneath a shiver of moonlight. You can almost taste the damp air, earthy, green, edged with rosemary and beeswax. A bell somewhere in the cloister gives a slow, solemn toll that feels like it's counting down to your own disappearance. You're not here for prayer, not exactly. You're here to learn the secret art of medieval monastic herb gardening, a discipline equal parts devotion, dirt, and a sprinkle of organized madness. You probably won't survive this century-long apprenticeship without at least one blister or mild existential crisis. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The abbey welcomes you with silence that hums louder than a crowd. The only movement comes from the flicker of an oil lamp carried by a monk whose tonsured head gleams like polished stone. You follow him through an arched passage smelling faintly of sage and smoke. Every footstep clicks against the flagstones, one beat for faith, one for fatigue. Beyond the cloister walk, a small door opens into a walled garden. The moon spills silver over orderly beds, paths of crushed shell gleaming like ribbons of light. This is your new classroom. Your textbooks are living things that hum softly in their sleep. The monk gestures for you to kneel by a plot edged with wattle fencing. Here, he whispers, is where the saints keep their secrets. You brush a hand across soft leaves, lavender, perhaps, and wonder how something so delicate survived centuries of frost and famine. The medieval monastery was more than a spiritual haven. It was a laboratory, pharmacy, and food bank rolled into one. When wars raged and kingdoms burned, monks were the quiet gardeners of civilization, coaxing medicine and memory from the soil. Every abbey worth its salt, or sage, had an herb garden, known as the hortus conclusus, a closed garden symbolic of both paradise and purity. The enclosed walls weren't just metaphor, they protected tender plants from wind, thieves, and the occasional over-enthusiastic goat. You rise as dawn begins to seep through the fog, and the bells for Lords echo across the valley. The air smells sharper now, touched by dew and anticipation. It's time to begin your apprenticeship. Your first lesson is observation. To know a plant, you must first watch it live. The brothers teach you to recognize subtle signs, the lean of a stem toward light, the curl of a leaf before rain. You quickly realize that in a monastic garden, everything happens on divine time. A mainstream historical fact: monasteries across medieval Europe, especially Benedictine ones, were responsible for preserving much of ancient botanical knowledge. When Rome fell and urban medicine crumbled, these communities became islands of green intelligence. The Capitula de Villiers, issued by Charlemagne around 800 CE, even listed the herbs monasteries were expected to cultivate: mint, sage, fennel, rue, and more. It was less a shopping list than a survival guide for civilization. And yet, within this discipline, curious contradictions thrive. One quirky tidbit that doesn't make it into most history books: some monks used to plant dill not only for digestion but to ward off hiccups believed to be demonic. Picture it, an exorcism performed with salad garnish. You can't help but smirk. Still, historians argue whether these gardens were primarily practical or profoundly symbolic. Were they hospitals disguised as spiritual sanctuaries, or metaphors for Eden, carefully maintained reminders of paradise lost and perhaps, in part, regained? The truth, like a stubborn root, resists easy pulling. As the day warms, you watch the gardeners move like a living clock. Each task aligns with a prayer, and each prayer with the sun. Monks don't weed for efficiency, they weed for eternity. Their rhythm isn't measured in hours but in hymns. You, modern and fidgety, find it maddening at first. Your fingers itch for progress, for something to tick off a list. But here, patience isn't a virtue, it's the air you breathe. One elder monk, Brother Odo, teaches you the language of sense. Every fragrance is a verse, he says, crushing time between his fingers. Listen, and it will pray for you. He's right. When you close your eyes, the garden hums, a low, buzzing chorus of bees, leaves, and faith. You realize that in this place, nature isn't background, it's scripture written in chlorophyll. By noon, the sun burns away the mist, and the cloister's arches glow gold. You join the brothers for a modest meal: barley bread, lentil soup, and a sprig of something green that tastes suspiciously like penance. They eat in silence while a single monk reads from a psalter. The rhythm is hypnotic. You find yourself chewing slower, matching your breath to the cadence of the words. Somewhere between spoonfuls, you catch a faint sweetness, mint, perhaps, and wonder if this is what enlightenment tastes like. After the meal, you return to the garden to tend the herb beds. Your hands plunge into the earth, dark and cool as bread dough. You learn to crumble soil between your fingers to test its life. If it clings too much, Brother Odo murmurs, it's jealous. Add sand. You nod solemnly, though you suspect he just likes poetic metaphors. A joke forms in your head. You came to find inner peace, but instead, you found compost therapy. Maybe the monks were onto something. Spiritual growth really does start with manure. By Vespers, the sky bleeds amber and violet, and the air carries the incense of crushed leaves. The garden is quiet again, though never truly still. You notice how the shadows stretch across the plots like ancient hands, and for a fleeting moment, you imagine every herb whispering a prayer in Latin. It's oddly comforting. You might even start believing that holiness smells faintly of basil. Night deepens, and candles bloom in the refectory windows. You wander back along the cloister, your robe brushing against cold stone. The echo of your footsteps sounds ancient, as if someone else once walked here, thinking the same thoughts, holding the same sprig of rosemary. You tuck it behind your ear, feeling faintly ridiculous but also strangely connected, to time, to earth, to every forgotten gardener who ever believed tending a plant could heal the soul. And as the bell tolls Compline, you understand that this is where your real education begins, not in books or sermons, but in soil. Every seed is a lesson, every weed a temptation, every bloom a benediction. You bow your head and breathe in the scent of sanctified dirt. The night wraps around you like a woolen cloak. Tomorrow, you'll dig deeper. The next morning, before dawn has even considered stretching her pale fingers over the hills, the bell calls you again. Its bronze voice cuts through mist and dreams alike, summoning every soul within the abbey walls to begin the holy machinery of the day. You pull your coarse wool robe tighter, the chill biting as you shuffle toward the garden. There's a strange comfort in the repetition already, the rhythm of waking, walking, and working before words are permitted. The garden glimmers under dew, each droplet catching the faint glow of lanterns. The monks move like shadows made of breath and purpose. Today, Brother Odo tells you, you'll learn the rule of the garden. You thought gardening was about seeds and sunlight, but here, it's also about salvation schedules and obedience to something greater than weeds. In the Benedictine world, every hour had its ordained labor, every gesture its counterpart in prayer. Ora et labora, the monk murmurs, pray and work. You'll hear that phrase often enough that it'll start to sound like both command and comfort. The idea is simple. Tending herbs is not a distraction from devotion, it is devotion. Each time you prune a stem, you prune a fragment of pride. Each seed sown in humility might grow into something medicinal, for the body or for the soul, depending on the abbey's inventory that season. The rule of Saint Benedict, written around the 6th century, became the blueprint for monastic life across Europe. It didn't explicitly mention gardens, but it spoke volumes about balance between manual labor, study, and worship. Monks interpreted this balance through soil. After all, God first placed humankind in a garden, and it's been a complicated relationship ever since. Brother Odo gives you a small wooden tablet with the day's assignments etched into it. You are to water the rue and the fennel, thin the leeks, and recite a psalm between each bed. At first, you find the multitasking impossible. Every time you try to recall the next verse, you overwater something. The Lord giveth, Odo jokes softly, and you drowneth. He pats your shoulder, and you both laugh quietly, the sound startling against the morning hush. This rhythm becomes your monastic heartbeat. Work, pray, breathe. Work again. The bells mark everything: prime, terce, sext, none. You never need a clock, because time itself grows and rose beside the time. The cadence of life here would make any modern productivity guru weep, equal parts discipline and surrender. A historical fact worthy of reverence. Many monastic schedules were so tightly linked to nature's cycles that the ringing of the bell was calibrated by sunlight. Some abbeys used sundials in the cloister to align prayers with shadow lengths. You can almost imagine Brother Odo adjusting his tasks by the drift of the sun, his spade and psalter equally weighted in his hands. Still, historians argue whether the rule's emphasis on labor truly made monks serene, or simply kept them too tired to sin. One school of thought claims the endless schedule was penance disguised as order. Another insists it fostered deep mindfulness centuries before mindfulness apps existed. You can decide for yourself as you weed in silence for 3 hours. Spoiler: enlightenment smells like nettles. Mid-morning, the garden comes alive with whispers of prayer and birdsong. Bees flit between lavender spikes. The air trembles with wings and psalms. You feel your body fall into the rhythm of the place, every breath, a kind of worship. You might not have believed in divine choreography before, but as you watch a monk move from one plot to another, swinging his spade in time with the chant carried from the chapel, you can't deny it looks like faith set to music. Brother Odo introduces you to the garden rota, a weekly list that determines who tends which herbs. It's strict enough to rival a modern project spreadsheet. Monday, marjoram and mint. Tuesday, sage, lavender, and rue. The rotation ensures that each brother touches every part of the living system, so no single patch becomes neglected or overly loved, like a heavenly HR policy. A quirky tidbit: certain monasteries assigned each monk a guardian plant. One herb he alone was responsible for year after year. If that plant thrived, it reflected his inner virtue. If it wilted, well, let's just say confession might come early that week. You imagine your plant would be something stubborn, like rosemary, which refuses to die no matter how much neglect you offer it. Odo stops by a patch of comfrey, a plant with fuzzy leaves and thick roots. For bones, he says, and for broken oaths. You ask if that's the same thing. He chuckles softly and doesn't answer. Later you'll learn that comfrey was indeed used to heal fractures and bruises, but also as a kind of charm for mending relationships. Apparently, forgiveness has a root system. As the sun rises higher, the bells call you back toward the refectory. The monks file in with quiet precision. Today's meal includes cheese flavored with chives from the garden, sharp, green, alive. You savor it more than you expected. Maybe there's something about eating what your own hands have tended that humbles you into gratitude. Or maybe you're just really hungry. After lunch, you follow Odo to the cloister walk, where he explains the rhythm of seasons within the rule's structure. We labor more in summer, he says, when God's hand is heavy with light. Winter is for mending tools and writing down what we've learned. You nod, realizing that for all their stillness, monks were essentially the first data analysts of doubt. Every pattern mattered: which herbs liked shade, which bloomed early, which failed despite prayer. The garden was a living ledger of trial and grace. Historians still argue whether this relentless structure stifled creativity or protected it. Some suggest that monastic uniformity kept individual innovation at bay. Others claim it was precisely the stability of the system that allowed experiments in botany and medicine to flourish. You consider how odd it is that something so rigid could grow something so alive. By dusk, you find yourself kneeling again, hands deep in the soil. A wind rises, carrying with it the mingled scents of mint, damp earth, and distant incense. You think about how every monk before you bent his back to this same rhythm, and how the rule was less about obedience than harmony, how the bells didn't command, they conducted. Your knees ache, your robe is smeared with mud, and yet you feel lighter, somehow. You whisper a psalm under your breath, not out of duty but because it feels right to let the garden hear your voice. The words drift through the twilight and settle over the herbs like a benediction. You wonder if centuries from now, someone will still be following this same rhythm, watering, praying, and waiting for a sign that devotion can bloom in the most ordinary of acts. Maybe faith isn't something that happens in grand gestures but in the patient tending of small things that can't yet feed or heal anyone. You smile to yourself, realizing that while you've come to learn about herbs, what you're really studying is time, and your own ability to stay still long enough for something to grow. You wake before the bell today, stirred by the low murmur of wind moving through the cloister arches. It sounds like distant chanting, a rehearsal for the morning prayers. You stretch, stiff from yesterday's labor, and step into the cool air that smells faintly of damp wool, smoke, and mint. Brother Odo is already outside, bent over a bench where an array of tools gleam dully in the half-light. "Today," he says, handing you a spade, "you'll learn the true instruments of grace." You turn the spade over in your hands. It's heavy, its edge worn to a soft curve. There's no shine of steel here, just the honest dullness of iron that's seen more roots than reflections. The tools of holy earthwork are simple: spade, sickle, trowel, hoe, pruning knife, rake, watering pot. Each has a purpose, and each, you quickly learn, comes with an etiquette bordering on liturgical. Tools are cleaned as carefully as chalices, sharpened like wits, and stored in perfect order. You wipe yours with a cloth dampened in oil that smells faintly of linseed and lavender, because even maintenance must be fragrant in a monastery. Brother Odo places a coiled basket beside you filled with other curiosities: bits of string, wooden markers, and a curious bronze tool shaped like a claw. "For loosening soil around roots," he explains. You nod, pretending to understand while quietly planning to stab yourself with it by accident before noon. A mainstream historical fact to tuck into your sleeve: most monastic gardens relied on tools forged by the monks themselves in the abbey smithy. Ironworking was a sacred craft, and the blacksmith's shop was often as central to the monastery as the chapel. Some abbeys even had their own foundries for nails, hinges, and candle holders. The monks considered craftsmanship a form of praise. Every well-made spade was a hymn in iron. You begin your lesson by digging a shallow trench. The soil resists at first, compacted by years of faithful trampling. Lean into it, Odo advises, but not with anger. The earth forgives patience, not punishment. You press your foot against the spade, and it slides in cleanly. There's something deeply satisfying about that sound, the faint suck of loam releasing its grip. You glance at Odo, he's smiling, as if you've just passed a test. Around you, other monks move in quiet rhythm. One trims sage with a crescent-shaped knife called a billhook. Another gathers fennel stalks using a small sickle that glints like moonlight. The soundscape is hypnotic: the hiss of cut stems, the crunch of steps, the faint murmur of psalms drifting from open windows. If modern workplaces had this soundtrack, you think, there'd be fewer coffee breaks and more enlightenment. You pause to examine one of the watering pots, a large ceramic vessel with small holes in its base. Medieval irrigation, Odo says, seeing your curiosity. Fill it, bury it near the roots, and the water seeps out slowly. You blink. The monks, it seems, invented the slow drip method centuries before houseplant influencers did. By mid-morning, you've learned the rhythm of handling each tool. The spade teaches strength, the trowel precision, the sickle humility, because one wrong swing and you'll prune something unintended, perhaps your own sandal. A joke forms in your head: he who lives by the sickle will die by the sickle, though you wisely keep that one to yourself. Still, the tools are extensions of a philosophy. Odo reminds you that every stroke, every motion, should be deliberate, unhurried, prayerful. The point isn't productivity, it's presence. You start to notice how even the smallest gestures, wiping the blade, straightening a handle, setting the spade down gently, feel like part of some larger choreography. It's not so much gardening as conversation, one between human and soil where both sides occasionally sigh in exasperation. There's also an artistry to repair. You watch a monk named Brother Matthew replace a cracked wooden handle with a new one carved from ash. He rubs beeswax into the grain and hums softly. The scent of honey mingles with iron and earth, a small, sacred trinity of smells. When he's done, he lifts the tool to the light like a priest raising a relic. "She'll dig true again," he says, as if the spade had been baptized. A quirky tidbit: monks often gave affectionate names to their tools. One recorded in a 12th century inventory is a hoe labeled Fidelis Servus, faithful servant. Another, less poetically, was simply the persuader. You can imagine the stories those names earned. You quietly decide to name your trowel Mildred, because it looks like a Mildred, helpful, blunt, and not to be crossed. As the day warms, Odo shows you how to sharpen the sickle on a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape creates a sound that feels older than language. A dull blade, he warns, is a lazy prayer. You file that away, both literally and metaphorically. There's a discipline here that transcends metal. It's about clarity, precision, intention. To keep your tools keen is to keep your purpose clear. Historians still argue whether such meticulous attention to craft was practical necessity or spiritual metaphor. Were monks simply excellent gardeners, or were they building a moral theology out of maintenance? You suspect the answer, as usual, is both. Faith, like iron, rusts if neglected. By afternoon, you're sweating through your robe. The spade feels heavier now, the soil more stubborn. Odo laughs softly. "The earth always tests its apprentices," he says. "Don't take it personally." You lean on the handle, breathing hard, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down, not as burden, but as continuity. Somewhere, you're sure, another novice once stood exactly where you do, thinking the same thought: I am both gardener and garden. A breeze lifts, carrying with it the scent of crushed basil and wood smoke. You catch yourself smiling, dirty and tired and inexplicably content. Maybe it's the simple satisfaction of work done with reverence. Or maybe it's the faint hope that somewhere under your blisters, wisdom is germinating. As twilight folds over the cloister, you help store the tools. Each one is wiped clean, oiled, and hung in perfect order. The racks gleam in the fading light like a row of quiet sentinels. Odo closes the door, locking it with a small iron key. "Never leave a blade unblessed by care," he murmurs. You nod, realizing the ritual isn't about the tools, it's about the discipline of respect. You look down at your hands, calloused, dirt-streaked, trembling slightly. They've become instruments too, as sacred in their small way as any chalice. The bell for Vespers rings, and you follow the sound back toward the chapel, feeling the slow satisfaction of having worked not just with tools, but alongside time itself. And as you walk through the cloister's cooling air, you catch your reflection in a polished watering can. You look ridiculous, hair wild, face streaked with dust, eyes bright. But there's something there, a flicker of understanding that even the simplest labor can be a liturgy. You grin, whisper to Mildred the trowel, "See you tomorrow," and step into the darkening hall where prayers and incense wait. Dawn again, and the chill bites harder this morning. Your breath steams in the dim cloister corridor as you make your way toward the garden. The world feels damp, expectant, and faintly fragrant with compost, that peculiar perfume of life from decay. Brother Odo is already there, sleeves rolled, shovel in hand, regarding a steaming pile of dark material as reverently as if it were gold. "Today," he says, "we speak of soil, compost, and the secret of night soil." You pause, unsure whether to be intrigued or alarmed. He gestures for you to kneel beside him. The mound looks unremarkable until he stirs it with his spade. Beneath the crusted surface, the compost glows with heat, alive with invisible labors. The scent that rises is complex. You try to identify it, earthy, smoky, and something else, faintly tragic. Odo smiles at your expression. "To make a garden," he says, "you must first make peace with rot." In the monastic rhythm, soil isn't just date, it's theology. The monks believed that everything created, once decayed, could nourish new life. The resurrection written in every seed was mirrored in the cycle of compost. Even the refuse of the kitchen, the straw from the stables, the leaves swept from cloister walks, all of it joined the slow sacrament of decomposition. You dig your fingers into the pile. It's surprisingly warm, almost comforting, like bread dough just before it rises. Heat, Odo explains, is the sign of transformation. He points out the layers: vegetable scraps, manure, ashes, and crushed eggshells, each with its role. The monks were masters of balance. Too much straw and the mix stayed cold, too much dung and it burned. As in the soul, he adds, so in the soil. A mainstream historical fact roots itself neatly here. Many medieval monastic records detail complex composting systems centuries before modern agriculture rediscovered them. The plan of St. Gall, a 9th century architectural drawing of an ideal Benedictine monastery, even includes designated areas for manure heaps and waste channels. These weren't afterthoughts. They were vital arteries in the body of the abbey. You ask about night soil. Odo's expression shifts somewhere between amusement and warning. Human waste, he admits, used sparingly. You blink. Sparingly? When mixed with ashes and straw, it enriches the beds. You try not to breathe too deeply. The lay brothers handle it mostly, he adds kindly, as though that helps. It is humble work, but humility feeds more than pride ever will. A quirky tidbit from history's less glamorous shelf: some monasteries maintained separate latrines that drained directly into channels leading to compost pits. In colder months, the monks added urine to hasten decomposition, a detail best forgotten before supper. You joke under your breath, truly, faith moves mountains of manure. Odo chuckles, unoffended. A holy heap, he says, is still holy. As the sun climbs, you move to a fallow plot and begin turning the soil. Each thrust of the spade releases an earthy sigh, the scent dense and rich. Earthworms writhe like living commas in a sentence older than language. They are our quiet brethren, Odo says. No chant, no robe, no rest, just endless service. You start to see them differently, those soft-bodied monks of the underworld. Historians still argue whether medieval gardeners understood the science behind soil fertility or simply stumbled upon success through habit and prayer. Some believe they intuited microbial processes long before germ theory. Others insist they only knew that certain combinations pleased God and the cabbages equally. Either way, the results were impressive. Monastic gardens produced herbs so potent that even kings sought their salves. You pause to rest and notice how your hands, once clean, hesitant, now look naturally suited to dirt. There's something freeing about not resisting the mess. Maybe that's the unspoken lesson. Control is overrated, rot inevitable, and growth impossible without both. You suspect there's a sermon buried in there somewhere, probably composted with yesterday's lunch scraps. Odo hands you a basket of powdered bone ash. For the hungry soil, he explains. Even death feeds life. You sprinkle it across the beds, and the wind lifts a small cloud that glitters briefly in sunlight before vanishing. For a heartbeat, it looks like dust ascending, a tiny resurrection. He leads you to the corner of the garden where nettles grow wild, tall, defiant, slightly smug. We let some weeds remain, he says. They tell us about the health of the earth. You learn that nettles enrich soil and provide fodder for compost, that dock leaves nearby soothe their sting. Nature, it seems, enjoys her small jokes of balance. When the day warms, the smell intensifies, sweet rot, mineral breath, a hint of old cabbage. You ask, half laughing, does holiness always stink this much? Odo smiles. Only in the beginning. You start layering new compost, straw first, then scraps, then a sprinkle of ash. Each layer feels ritualistic, almost liturgical. The repetition is soothing, like reciting a prayer you don't yet understand but trust will work. You think of modern life's obsession with sterility, bleach, polish, clean lines, and how here, the opposite holds true. Dirt is purity, decay, a promise. By afternoon, you're slick with sweat, your robe streaked with honest filth. A breeze stirs the fig tree near the wall, carrying a scent that almost hides the compost heap's more aggressive notes. Birds swoop down to hunt worms in your freshly turned beds. Everything feels in motion, the quiet, continuous exchange between what dies and what feeds. Odo pours water over the heap and covers it with straw. Now we let it rest, he says. 3 months, maybe 4. When it smells like earth instead of death, it's ready. You admire the logic, simple, forgiving, patient. Maybe all transformation needs that, time and cover from judgment. A bell rings in the distance, signaling sext, the midday prayer. You wipe your brow, noticing streaks of mud on your face. Odo looks at you fondly. You wear the mark of a gardener, he says. Better than any saint's halo. You laugh, though you secretly hope he's right. As you walk back toward the cloister, the smell of compost clings stubbornly to your robe. A novice passing by wrinkles his nose. You've been in the pit, he mutters. Indeed, you reply, and found paradise underneath. He doesn't get the joke, but you don't mind. You've learned something ancient today, that even the most unpleasant work can hum with holiness if done with care. That night, lying on your narrow cot, you can still feel the warmth of the compost heap radiating through memory. It pulses like a living thing, a slow, dark heart beating beneath the monastery. You think about everything that dies in order for something else to live. The herbs, the waste, even your former impatience. Somewhere between rot and rebirth, you find peace. Morning sunlight glances off the cloister windows, slanting into neat squares that march across the flagstones like obedient monks themselves. Today, Brother Odo meets you beside the central well of the garden, his sandals dusted with chalk from the gravel paths. He gestures grandly to the space around you. We have dug, we have composted, he says. Now, we design. You realize you're standing at the intersection of practicality and poetry. Time to learn the geometry of devotion, the secret blueprint behind every monastic garden. The air smells of lime and crushed sage. You trail Odo as he walks the perimeter, a cord of knotted rope in his hand. Every garden must mirror the order of heaven, he says. No chaos, no waste. Each plant has its rightful cell, just as each monk does. You nod, trying to keep up. The symmetry is mesmerizing. Beds unfold in a perfect grid, pathways dividing them like veins in a leaf, all converging toward the central well, symbol of divine source and, less poetically, the abbey's water supply. You begin pacing out your own section under Odo's watchful eye. The rope stretches, you mark corners with stones, and soon the space begins to reveal itself. For equal beds bordered by low wattle fencing, neat and satisfying. The catafalque design, he says proudly, a garden shaped like a cross, so even your parsley remembers the passion. You grin. A pious salad. Odo chuckles, approval in monk form. A mainstream historical fact plants itself firmly here. The cloister garden design followed a strict symbolic geometry, often divided into 4 quadrants representing the elements: earth, air, fire, and water, or the Gospels. The center, marked by a fountain or well, symbolized Christ as the source of life. Practical and spiritual, beauty and function coiled tightly together like the spirals of a snail shell. You walk the paths and feel the rhythm of the design. Every step seems measured to calm the pulse. It's not just efficient, it's meditative. A place where thought slows and order seeps into the bones. The monks knew that symmetry soothed the soul as much as good soup did. As you map out the beds, Odo explains their purposes. One for healing herbs, another for kitchen spices, one for dye plants, and one reserved for experiments, new seeds from traders or pilgrims. You raise an eyebrow. So, the medieval version of a research lab? He nods. Exactly, though with fewer explosions. To mark the boundaries, you weave low fences of willow branches, their pliant wands creaking softly as they bend. The smell of green sap fills the air. You notice how the walls, not tall, but enclosing, make the space feel safe, almost inward turning. The hortus conclusus, Odo reminds you, the enclosed garden. It keeps out the goats, yes, but also distractions. Within these walls, the mind can grow straight. A quirky tidbit blossoms here. Some monasteries grew marigolds and lilies not for medicine but for devotion. The lily, pure and pale, was dedicated to the Virgin Mary. The marigold, golden and earthy, was her humbler companion. Certain abbeys arranged their beds to spell out her name in Latin, Mea, when seen from above. You wonder how many passing angels admired that horticultural handwriting. You stop to survey your work, noticing how sunlight pools differently in each quadrant. One bed sits in full brilliance, perfect for thyme and rosemary. Another nestles in half shadow, ideal for parsley and mint. You realize the monks were early masters of microclimates, even if they phrased it in more poetic terms. Each herb seeks its own prayer of light. Historians still argue whether monastic gardens were meant primarily for utility or contemplation. Some claim they were practical hospitals of herbs, others that they were physical metaphors for paradise lost and patiently recultivated. You decide it can be both. After all, nothing says redemption like a well-behaved row of cabbages. The central well draws your attention. It gleams darkly, a mirror to the sky. You lean over and see your reflection ripple beside clouds and the faint silhouette of the bell tower. Every garden needs a heart, Odo says. Without water, even faith wilts. He tosses in a pebble, and concentric circles spread outward, touching the reflected arches. The metaphor practically writes itself. By mid-morning, you're setting stone markers at each bed corner. The work is methodical, satisfying. Each placement feels like sealing a vow. Here shall grow healing, here nourishment, here beauty, here curiosity. You can already imagine the future textures, the silver fuzz of sage, the glossy leaves of basil, the purple spires of hyssop trembling like lit candles. You joke that the symmetry might drive a chaotic gardener mad. Perhaps that is the test, Odo replies, tying his rope neatly. The garden teaches order to those who crave freedom, and patience to those who crave results. You're beginning to suspect that everything in this monastery is secretly a sermon disguised as a task. The bell rings for toast, and a thin chorus of chanting drifts from the chapel. You pause, listening. The rhythm of the chant seems to echo the rhythm of the garden, the rise and fall, the pauses, the return to center. You think maybe that's the point, to align the pulse of prayer and plant, until both beat in time. After prayers, you return to scatter gravel along the paths. Each handful makes a satisfying crunch. You smooth the edges with your boot, admiring the neatness. There's something immensely peaceful about finishing a path. It implies direction, purpose, a way through. You remember the compost heap from yesterday and smile. From chaos to order, rot to rhythm. Gardening really is theology with a hoe. Odo points to the north wall, where vines are beginning to climb. Walls must live too, he says. Plant ivy or roses to soften the stone. You imagine how, come spring, the entire garden will hum with color, green against gray, life against austerity. It's strangely moving, this blend of discipline and wildness held in perfect balance. As the sun slides westward, the garden's geometry glows with soft shadows. From above, if some passing angel really does glance down, it would look like a living mandala of green and light. You and Odo stand silently, admiring the lines. The order is beautiful, but it's also humbling, a reminder that design is never ownership, only stewardship. You brush dirt from your robe, though it doesn't help much. Odo smiles, handing you a small sprig of thyme. Every good design needs scent, he says. Rub this between your fingers. Let the smell remind you, structure must still breathe. You do, and the air fills with sharp, sweet fragrance. As twilight settles, you look back once more at the garden, the measured paths, the neat beds, the stillness gathering over the well. It's more than a plan now, it's a promise. Tomorrow, you'll begin filling it with life. Tonight, you let the symmetry settle into your bones. The next morning, the air carries the smell of rain-soaked earth and faint incense drifting from the chapel. You find Brother Odo already in the garden, sleeves rolled, a faint smile under his grey beard. Today, he says, we enter the herbarium of healing. He gestures toward a low stone building just beyond the cloister wall, a place you've only glimpsed from afar. The infirmary. Inside, the air changes instantly, cool, heavy, tinged with sharp notes of vinegar, lavender, and something musky that could either be sage or regret. Shelves climb from floor to ceiling, lined with earthen jars labeled in spidery Latin: rosmarinus, salvia, ruta, hyssopus. Bundles of drying herbs hang upside down from the rafters like a congregation of aromatic bats. A novice moves among them, checking the bundles, his eyes distant, as if listening for whispers. Odo lights a small lamp, the flame flickering gold across the jars. Every garden grows toward this room, he says softly. The body's need gives the plants their purpose. You run your hand along a shelf, feeling the faint roughness of ceramic, the dust of centuries. Each jar seems to hum with quiet confidence, holding both cure and mystery. The infirmera, the monk in charge of medicine, enters silently, a tall figure named Brother Aelred. His hands are stained green to the wrists, his nails rimmed with dark residue. You are the new gardener, he says. Then you are my accomplice. You can't tell if that's reassuring. He waves you closer to a table covered with bowls, mortars, and bundles of herbs. We shall make a poultice of comfrey, he declares, for bruises of the flesh and perhaps the pride. You crush the comfrey leaves with a pestle. Their smell is sharp, green, and faintly fishy. It binds bones, Aelred explains. We call it knit bone. You imagine medieval athletes hobbling in, wrapped like burritos in leaves. He hands you another jar. Willow bark, he says. Pain's quiet enemy. You realize you're holding the ancestor of aspirin, centuries before chemistry claimed it. A mainstream historical fact blooms naturally here. Many monastic infirmaries doubled as the only functioning hospitals in medieval Europe. Their herb gardens supplied ingredients for salves, teas, and syrups. Monks catalogued ailments and remedies in texts such as the Leech Book of Bald and Hildegard of Bingen's Physica, preserving medical knowledge through centuries of upheaval. Aelred hands you a scrap of parchment, a list of symptoms written in Latin so crabbed you mistake fever for ferret. Learn them, he says, but never trust ink alone. Every illness smells different. He gestures for you to lean over a steaming bowl. The scent is acrid, vinegar steeped with rosemary and rue. Infection, he murmurs. The herbs know before the patient does. You inhale again, cough, and wonder if enlightenment can also be slightly toxic. A quirky tidbit sprigs up here. Medieval monks often tested new concoctions on themselves before offering them to patients. Some remedies included cheerful ingredients like ground pearls or powdered toad. One enthusiastic brother in the 13th century insisted that snail slime cured sore throats. And did it work, you ask? Odo shrugs. He stopped complaining, at least. You assist Aelred in mixing a salve of honey, vinegar, and powdered lavender. The smell is heavenly, the texture, less so. He spreads a little on a linen cloth. Applied to wounds. Pray. Repeat. His tone suggests prayer may not be optional. You note the quiet balance between faith and practicality, science in sandals, cautious but curious. Historians still argue whether these herbal treatments were genuinely effective or simply better than the alternatives, which often involved bleeding or divine hope. Yet modern studies vindicate many of them: honey as antibacterial, garlic as antibiotic, willow bark as analgesic. The monks, it seems, were far from blind alchemists. They were empiricists wrapped in robes. Odo leads you to the drying room, where rows of herbs sway gently in the draught. He explains the art of preservation. Hang them where air moves but light does not. Too much sun, and even holiness fades. The scent here is intoxicating, a mingling of mint, chamomile, and thyme so potent you feel calmer just standing in it. Maybe the first step in healing is simply to breathe deeply. You pass a small table where an illuminated manuscript lies open. Drawings of plants unfurl across the page, their colors still vivid after centuries. Each leaf recorded, Odo says, each root described. Knowledge must grow on parchment too. You run your finger near the ink, careful not to touch. The illustration of a poppy catches your eye, its petals painted like drops of fire. The caption reads, Somniferaum, for sleep and mercy. You imagine a medieval night nurse brewing a potion of poppy and honey for some fevered pilgrim. The candlelight would flicker across his face, and in that glow, medicine and miracle might look indistinguishable. By afternoon, you're grinding more herbs than you thought existed. The mortar's rhythm becomes hypnotic. Odo hums a psalm. Aelred counts the strokes softly, like a prayer in fractions. The mixture turns from green to gold, thick as honey. You spread it on cloth, roll it, and stack it neatly. Discipline, Aelred says. A messy salve heals no one. Outside, thunder mutters over the hills. Rain begins to tap against the small window. The scent of wet herbs rises like incense. For a moment, you realize the connection between this humble room and the larger world. The same rain that feeds the garden now washes its medicines into life. Everything circles back, nothing wasted. Aelred shows you a cabinet of strange relics, a vial of powdered unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, though the monks didn't know it, a bundle of dried poppy heads tied with silk, a jar labeled aqua mirabilis, miracle water, distilled from rosemary and hope. You raise an eyebrow. Does it work? He smiles thinly. Faith improves the odds. As dusk deepens, the infirmary glows like a lantern from within. You help Odo carry the finished salves to the shelves. Each jar finds its place, a small act of order against the world's chaos. You notice how quiet it feels now, the hum of rain outside like a heartbeat. You catch your reflection in one of the glazed jars, your face framed by hanging herbs. You look like some medieval apothecary ghost, half scholar, half dote. You can't help but laugh softly. What's funny? Odo asks. Just realizing I smell like medicine and compost, you reply. A holy combination, he says. As you step back into the garden, the rain softens to drizzle. Drops glisten on the leaves of sage and rue, and the air feels newly washed. You understand now that every leaf here carries more than scent. It carries memory, labor, belief. Healing, in this place, isn't only physical. It's something quieter, older, something that begins in the soil and ends, maybe, in the soul. By morning, the rain has rinsed the world clean again. Sunlight slides down the cloister walls in golden ribbons, and the bells summon everyone to the refectorium, the monastic dining hall, where prayer meets porridge. Your stomach growls faintly as the smell of baking bread and simmering broth drifts through the air, carrying hints of herbs you recognize from the garden. Today, Brother Odo grins and hands you a wooden spoon. You've learned how to heal the body, he says. Now you learn how to feed it, without offending heaven or the stomach. The kitchen is alive with gentle chaos, kettles bubbling, knives tapping, and a haze of steam that curls toward the vaulted ceiling. Brothers move quietly between tasks, their gestures practiced, like a slow ballet of spoons and prayers. In one corner, a monk crushes parsley against a slab of stone, the sound a soft rhythm. He's the Herbarius Kokini, Odo whispers, the kitchen herbalist. A dangerous man. He controls the flavor of penance. You approach a table piled high with bunches of green, mint, sage, dill, fennel, and a proud mountain of leeks. The air smells like spring with an edge of onion rebellion. These are our jewels, says Brother Ambrose, the cook, holding up a bundle of parsley as if it were gold. Without them, our meals would taste like sermons, worthy, but dull. You laugh. And with them. He winks. Still worthy, but worth chewing. A mainstream historical fact stirs the pot. Monastic diets in medieval Europe were largely vegetarian, especially on fasting days, which were numerous, sometimes over 200 a year. Meat was often forbidden, so herbs became essential to make fish, grains, and legumes palatable. They weren't just seasoning, they were salvation for the taste buds. You help chop mint and toss it into a pot of lentils simmering with garlic and vinegar. The scent that rises is warm and tangy, and you feel an almost unholy satisfaction. Ambrose nods approvingly. The balance of flavors mirrors the balance of the soul, he declares. Too much salt, pride. Too little, despair. You wonder how many theological disputes could have been settled with better seasoning. A novice scurries by with a tray of eel fillets. You raise an eyebrow. Eel. Odo grins. Technically, it's not meat. The church says it's a fish. So we eat it with a clear conscience and a clouded stomach. You can't help laughing. You bend the rules like rosemary in the wind. Ah, he says, faith must be flexible, or it snaps. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some monasteries brewed herb beer, using sage, yarrow, or ground ivy instead of hops. The result was a mildly medicinal beverage that kept the brothers hydrated and, occasionally, cheerful. Our ale, Ambrose explains proudly, cures melancholy, strengthens the liver, and encourages polite conversation. You sniff the mug he offers, herbal, grassy, with a kick of something suspiciously minty. Polite conversation, sure, you murmur. Around midday, the refectory bell rings again. Monks file in silently, robes whispering, eyes lowered. Meals are taken in near silence, except for the appointed reader who recites scripture from a lectern while everyone eats. The soft drone of his voice blends with the clinking of spoons. You ladle broth into bowls, thick with beans, scented with sage and thyme. The steam fogs your face, and you feel oddly serene. You notice a platter of herbs arranged like a miniature garden in the center of the long table. Aromatic reminders, Odo whispers. Each has a meaning. Mint for joy, parsley for renewal, thyme for courage. You pluck a sprig of thyme, crush it between your fingers, and the scent unfurls, sharp and comforting. Historians still argue whether monastic herb use was more practical or symbolic, were the brothers chefs or philosophers with knives. Some manuscripts treat recipes as acts of devotion, instructions written with the same care as prayers. Others read like early cookbooks, filled with precise measurements and the occasional sarcastic note about overcooked peas. Faith and flavor, Odo muses, share one rule, moderation. After the meal, you follow Ambrose to the small kitchen garden behind the refectory. It's smaller than the medicinal beds but no less tended. Bees hum lazily between clumps of basil and marjoram. He kneels and shows you how to pluck basil leaves without bruising them. Handle herbs like gossip, he advises. Firmly, but gently. You grin. And what about weeds? Ah, those, he says, you remove without discussion. You collect sprigs of dill and fennel for pickling, their feathery fronds catching the light like green lace. Ambrose explains how herbs helped preserve food through long winters, parsley for freshness, sage to slow spoilage, mint to keep pests at bay. The monks may not have known the chemistry, but they knew the results: fewer sick bellies and a little more joy on fast days. He leads you to a wooden chest filled with dried herbs, each wrapped in linen. The aroma that escapes when he opens it is dizzying, a time capsule of summer. We store sunlight here, he says softly. You find yourself believing him. By evening, preparations begin for the Sunday meal, a small feast by monastic standards. Ambrose directs you to chop onions while he stirs a cauldron of pottage thickened with barley and scented with bay. The kitchen grows steamy, the windows fog with fragrant ghosts. You wipe sweat from your forehead and quip, so this is the holy sauna experience. Only with more onions, Odo replies from behind a pile of leeks. As the stew simmers, Ambrose sprinkles in a final mix: rosemary, savory, and a pinch of saffron, imported, precious, a golden thread through brown broth. Luxury, he says with mock solemnity. But even monks need miracles of taste. You think about the long days of fasting, the quiet labor in the gardens, the prayers muttered over seeds. Maybe this is their reward, not indulgence, but gratitude in edible form. The brothers eat that night by candlelight, bowls cupped in their hands, faces soft in the glow. No one speaks, yet the mood feels almost festive. The scent of rosemary drifts through the hall, wrapping the silence in warmth. You realize how central herbs are here, not garnish, but grace. They season not just the food, but the rhythm of life itself. Later, when the dishes are washed and stacked, You step outside into the cool night. The stars shimmer above the cloister roof, and the faint smell of mint lingers on your hands. You rub your fingers together, smiling. Somewhere between prayer and parsley, you've learned the monastery's greatest recipe, patience seasoned with purpose. The morning dew still clings to the thyme as you wander back into the cloister garden. The air smells like cool stone and mint tea left out overnight. Brother Odo is already there, sleeves rolled, holding a copper pot and wearing an expression that suggests alchemy, or trouble. Today, he says, we conquer two enemies, stink and insects. Possibly using the same potion. He sets the pot on a small brazier, drops in sprigs of rosemary, lavender, and rue, and pours in well water. The scent begins to rise at once, sharp, clean, a fragrance that makes the nose feel scrubbed from the inside out. We call this aqua odorifera, he explains. The water of pleasantness. It keeps the brothers fresh, the linens pure, and the mosquitoes remorseful. You grin. So medieval cologne. Odo nods, stirring. Exactly. Though our customers are more devout and less fashionable. He adds a few cloves and a twist of lemon peel, rare and precious from distant lands. A gift from pilgrims, he says. Every drop of citrus a little miracle. A mainstream historical fact unfurls like steam. Monks distilled herbs in copper alembics long before modern perfumery took shape. Their aromatic waters, of rose, rosemary, or lavender, were prized for cleansing wounds, refreshing rooms, and, in theory, improving the mood of the eternally pious. The Abbey of Santa Maria Novella in Florence, founded in the 13th century, still produces perfumes derived from monastic recipes. Faith, it seems, ages well when bottled. The pot hisses gently. You lean in, inhaling the heady mixture. Smells divine, you say. Good, Odo replies, because we're using it on the toilets next. You cough. Excuse me, what? The guardrobes. Every room deserves grace. You can't argue with that. He hands you a small pouch filled with dried lavender and crushed wormwood. Hang these by the bed, he says. Keeps fleas humble. You slip one into your robe, half expecting it to hum. Did it work, you ask. Usually, Odo says. Or at least the fleas smelled better. A novice trots up, holding a broom like a spear. Brother Odo, the kitchen has a problem. You follow them into the refectory to find an army of ants enjoying last night's breadcrumbs. Odo sighs. They are industrious little pagans. He scatters mint leaves along their trail. Within moments, the ants turn back as though repelled by divine bureaucracy. Mint, he explains, for the righteous defense of bread. A quirky tidbit sprouts here. Some medieval monks used dried tansy and elder leaves not just to repel pests, but as amulets against evil spirits. They hung bunches above doors, muttering small prayers to keep demons, or drafts, out. Double purpose, Odo says cheerfully. Protection for the soul, and fewer moth holes. Back in the garden, he shows you a small still hidden beneath a wooden awning. This, he says, patting the copper belly of the apparatus, is where the real magic happens. You watch as steam snakes up a narrow tube, condenses, and drips into a glass vessel. Drop by drop, clear, fragrant water collects. Distillation, Odo says proudly. Heaven through condensation. You can't resist a joke. So this is medieval chemistry class. He nods solemnly. With better smelling explosions. The day warms, and soon the air is thick with fragrance, thyme and sage mingling with faint notes of vinegar and honey. You realize that, in a world before soap was cheap and plumbing was a fantasy, scent wasn't luxury. It was survival. The monastery needed to fight rot, fleas, and worse, and herbs were their fragrant shield. Historians still argue whether these perfumed waters were primarily medicinal or spiritual. Did monks use lavender to cleanse wounds or to purify spaces for prayer? The answer, like most things here, is probably yes. Practicality and mysticism wove together like ivy around a column. By mid-morning, Odo leads you to another task, pest control in the garden. The caterpillars, he says grimly, are testing our faith. You inspect the chewed leaves of cabbages and nod sympathetically. He mixes a brew of crushed garlic, nettles, and vinegar, the smell enough to make sin confess itself. Sprinkle this, he instructs, and sing Psalm 51 while you do. It works better if the Lord hears you retching. You dutifully follow his advice. The mixture burns your nose, the psalm wavers between prayer and gag. But as the sun rises higher, the cabbage leaves glisten, and the caterpillars retreat, whether in fear of divine retribution or garlic breath, who can say? A young novice passes carrying a basket of roses. For perfume, you ask. For relics, Odo replies. We press petals into wax to scent the candles. When bound during prayer, they remind the brothers that even devotion should smell pleasant. You like that idea, a small rebellion against austerity. As noon approaches, the air hums with bees. They drift lazily between the lavender rows, drunk on pollen. You and Odo sit in the shade of a fig tree, wiping sweat from your foreheads. The herb garden gleams under the sun, its perfumes mingling into something impossible to separate. Clean, rich, alive. You glance toward the dormitory and notice bundles of herbs stuffed into windows and rafters. Does every room get its own aroma? Indeed, Odo says. Chamomile for sleep, sage for wisdom, mint for breath, and rue for humility. You pause. Does it work? Mostly, he replies. Except for Brother Thomas. He's still proud and snores like a blessed ox. After your short rest, you return to bottle the distilled water. The scent is concentrated summer, floral and medicinal at once. You fill small glass flasks, cork them tightly, and label each with neat ink letters. Odo lines them up on a shelf. Aqua rosarum, aqua lavanduli, aqua vitae. This last one, he says, tapping the third, is for the abbot. Strong enough to revive the dead, or at least the sleepy. You take a cautious sniff and nearly cough. That's not perfume, you wheeze, that's spiritual warfare. Exactly, he says, smiling. As the day fades, a light breeze carries the scent of all you've brewed, sweet, bitter, cleansing. The garden hums softly, as if content with its own balance of beauty and usefulness. You realize that every perfume, every concoction, is both shield and prayer, protection against decay, and gratitude for the living air. The monks gather in the cloister for evening prayers, their robes brushing the fragrant herbs as they pass. The air fills with overlapping smells, rose from the candles, mint from the walkways, lavender from your hands. You close your eyes, breathing it all in. The world seems briefly perfect, clean, and calm, like the first breath after a storm. And then Odo leans over and whispers, "Tomorrow, we talk about forbidden herbs." He winks. Best sleep well, you'll need plausible deniability. Dawn creeps across the cloister stones like a cautious thief. The air feels heavier today, thick with damp soil and whispers. Brother Odo meets you at the edge of the garden with an expression halfway between mischief and caution. You've learned the healing herbs, the holy herbs, the fragrant and the edible, he murmurs. Now, we enter the shadows of the garden, the ones we do not name too loudly. You follow him through the narrow gate that leads beyond the orderly quadrants of thyme and sage. Here, the earth is wilder, the fence is lower, the air strangely sweet. This, he says, is where curiosity blooms. And occasionally explodes. He bends to touch a dark, glossy leaf. Henbane, he whispers. Beautiful, deadly, and very popular with overambitious alchemists. You hesitate before stepping closer. Should I be touching anything? He smiles faintly. Only if you wish to meet your ancestors early. He's joking, mostly. The leaves shine like satin, veined in purple. Used carefully, he explains, it dulls pain and quiets madness. Used carelessly, it brings both. He glances at you. Balance, always balance. A mainstream historical fact roots itself firmly here. In medieval medicine, plants like henbane, mandrake, and belladonna were part of the monastic pharmacopoeia, though used sparingly. Their alkaloids were powerful, anesthesia in an age without needles. But their side effects could be, well, terminal. Monks documented them cautiously, often wrapping their recipes in layers of metaphor. You imagine a scribe carefully writing, a leaf for sleep, a root for silence, and deciding that was specific enough. You move deeper into the patch. The air grows cooler, as though the sun hesitates to intrude. Odo shows you another plant, its leaves jagged, its flowers pale yellow. Mandragora, he says. The mandrake. You've heard of it, a root shaped like a tiny human, the stuff of myth. They say it screams when pulled from the ground, you whisper. They say many things, Odo replies. Historians still argue whether the screams were myth, metaphor, or a gardener with low pain tolerance. He crouches, brushing aside soil until you glimpse a root vaguely shaped like legs. You shiver despite yourself. Do you really use it? Sometimes, he says. In sleeping draughts, in potions for pain. Hildegard of Bingen wrote of it as both dangerous and divine. The trick, he adds dryly, is not confusing the two. A small wooden cross marks a corner of the patch. Beneath it, faint letters carved into the post read Herby Duby, doubtful herbs. You realize how precarious knowledge was here, wisdom perched on the edge of heresy. Why keep them if they are forbidden, you ask. Odo shrugs. Because ignorance kills faster than curiosity. We study the shadow so others need not walk in it. A quirky tidbit unfurls. Some monasteries kept their most potent herbs behind locked gates and referred to them in coded Latin. Herba mortis, radix lunaria, lac diaboli. One abbey in France supposedly used moonlight rituals to harvest mandrake, sending the youngest novice to do it while the others chanted psalms for protection. Did it work, you ask? Odo smiles. The plants grew. The novice ran away. Both reasonable outcomes. You follow him to a low table where several dried specimens rest on cloth. Belladonna, he says, tapping a brittle stem. Deadly nightshade. We once used it for eye drops, to dilate the pupils. It made the sisters look more angelic, according to rumor. You blink. Fashionable poisoning. Exactly. Vanity has long roots. The air is heavy with the smell of damp roots and something faintly metallic. You notice a jar labeled Atropa. Odo explains that it's named for Atropos, one of the fates, the one who cuts the thread of life. We name things honestly here, he says. Historians still argue whether monasteries condoned this shadowy practice at all. Some claim such herbs were hidden from official records, used quietly in infirmaries when pain demanded mercy. Others believe the church banned them outright, branding their use as witchcraft. The truth likely lies somewhere between medicine and miracle, whispered in Latin no one dared translate too clearly. Odo walks ahead, stopping beside a tangle of wild-looking vines dotted with small red berries. Bittersweet, he says. Good for melancholy, in small doses. In larger ones, It simply removes the need for melancholy altogether. You try not to laugh but fail. So the medieval antidepressant was basically Russian roulette with plants. More or less, he says with a grin. You notice how different this part of the garden feels. Less symmetrical, less obedient. Here the plants grow as they please, their borders smudged, their stems interlaced like gossip. We let them be, Odo says softly. The holy garden must have a wild corner. Without shadow, how would we recognize light? He plucks a sprig of rue and holds it out. Smell. You do, it's bitter, almost electric. Rue cleanses the spirit, he says, but it also irritates the skin. A perfect metaphor for confession. You chuckle. Does everything in this place double as a sermon? Of course, he says. We monks. It's what we do. A novice appears at the gate, holding a parchment sealed in red wax. The abbot requests Odo's presence immediately. He sighs. You see? Even herbs can't repel bureaucracy. As he leaves, you wander the patch alone. The plants whisper softly in the wind, their leaves brushing each other like conspirators. You kneel to touch the soil. It's rich, warm, alive. These so-called forbidden herbs don't feel evil, just misunderstood. You imagine the monks centuries ago, balancing between duty and discovery, faith and fear. How many cures were lost because someone was afraid of the dark? How many dangers avoided because someone wasn't? The line between salvation and sin seems thinner than a time stem. The sun climbs higher, and a beam of light cuts across the patch, illuminating the mandrake leaves in a sudden glow. You think of all the stories, the screaming roots, the witch's brews, the whispered experiments at midnight. Maybe truth and myth are simply two sides of the same leaf. Odo returns, looking faintly amused. The abbot reminded me that knowledge must serve charity, not curiosity. He pauses, then smirks. So we're charitable enough to share our curiosity with you. He hands you a small vial filled with dark liquid. Sleep draught, he explains. Mandrake and poppy, diluted. Not forbidden, just frowned upon. Useful when the mind refuses to rest. You pocket it carefully, feeling the weight of centuries of caution. Do you ever use it yourself? You ask. Only on nights when the past grows too noisy, he says quietly. As you walk back toward the main garden, the air shifts again, lighter, cleaner, full of thyme and rosemary instead of danger. You glance back once more at the hidden patch, its leaves trembling in the breeze like a secret you're now part of. For all its dangers, it feels oddly holy, a place where faith admits fear and still chooses to learn. You think maybe that's what wisdom really is, not the absence of danger, but the courage to study it by daylight. The first frost licks at the edges of the garden, silvering the sage and crisping the mint into paper-thin curls. You wake early, your breath visible in the air, and hear the muffled thud of the bell calling the brothers to prime. The rhythm of monastic life is changing again, slipping quietly from abundance toward endurance. Brother Odo joins you at the well, rubbing his hands for warmth. Now you learn, he says, that a gardener's faith is measured in patience, especially when the world freezes solid. You nod, pulling your cloak tighter. The herbs that only weeks ago sang with scent now droop under frost, their colors fading from green to gray. Odo seems unbothered. Death, he says cheerfully, is the compost of spring. You can't tell whether that's comforting or just very monastic. He leads you along the gravel paths, pointing with his staff. These beds, he says, will sleep now. We do not mourn them, we prepare them. You kneel beside the thyme, brush away the frost, and see tiny buds still clinging beneath. Resilient little sinners, Odo mutters fondly. They'll rise again at Easter, like everything else we care about. A mainstream historical fact roots itself gently here. Medieval monasteries followed the agricultural calendar as closely as the liturgical one. The garden was divided not only by geometry, but by time, seasons dictating what could be planted, harvested, or left fallow. The Benedictine rule itself prescribed work according to daylight hours, meaning that the rhythm of prayer and planting often beat in the same measure. The brothers moved through the garden with quiet efficiency, harvesting what remains: leeks, late parsley, and winter savory. You join them, fingers stiff from cold, tying bundles of herbs that will dry by the kitchen fire. The scent of damp earth and frost-bitten mint fills the air, oddly invigorating. Everything ends, Odo says, but nothing's wasted. Even decay teaches us how to begin again. Inside the herb house, racks groan under the weight of drying leaves. The warm air smells like spice and smoke. You hang your bundles and watch steam rise from your breath. A novice passes, balancing a tray of apples shriveled by storage, and you realize the monks have mastered not just growth, but preservation, the art of keeping life through winter. A quirky tidbit sprouts. In some abbeys, monks marked seasonal changes with small ceremonies, burying seeds on Candlemas, blessing tools at midsummer, or lighting herbal incense during Advent. One particularly hopeful brother in Normandy supposedly sprinkled ashes mixed with holy water onto frozen soil to encourage early enthusiasm in reluctant cabbages. You chuckle at that. Odo nods solemnly. Faith and optimism, he says. Two ingredients no gardener can do without. The days shorten, and the garden's palette shifts to browns and grays. The fountain freezes at the edges, its surface holding a thin crust of ice that cracks when touched. You walk the paths slower now, each step crunching frost. Odo explains how the monks use this time for reflection and repair. Tools are sharpened, fences mended, plans drawn for spring. The garden sleeps, but the gardener dreams. Historians still argue whether monastic labor was meant as genuine devotion or pragmatic necessity. Was the rule's emphasis on manual work a spiritual metaphor, or simply a way to keep hundreds of restless men productive? You decide it doesn't matter. When your fingers ache from tying twine and your breath fogs like incense, even theology feels like hard-earned warmth. By late morning, the brothers gathered to spread mulch over the bare beds, straw, compost, and the last of the autumn leaves. Protection, Odo says, for the silent months. You scoop handfuls of straw and scatter it gently, watching it settle like a blanket. The act feels intimate, almost parental. You think of the herbs beneath, waiting quietly in the dark, and it strikes you how faith often looks like this, tending what you cannot yet see. At midday, the kitchen bell rings, and you follow the monks inside for hot broth scented with sage. The warmth seeps through your chilled fingers. Conversation remains forbidden, but the way the brothers lean into the steam feels almost communal, shared gratitude without words. After the meal, Odo brings you to a small room beside the scriptorium. Its shelves are lined with sacks of seeds labeled in Latin. This is the true treasury, he says. Gold spoils, relics fade, but seeds, these resurrect every year. You pick up a small pouch marked Papava somnifera. Poppy. We store the future, he murmurs, one handful at a time. Snow begins to fall that afternoon, slow, steady, muffling the world. You and Odo watch from the cloister walkway as the first flakes settle on the garden's edges. The world softens, he says. Even sharp herbs become gentle under snow. You find yourself whispering, "It looks like the garden's praying." He smiles. It always is. That night, you walk alone beneath the arcade. The lamps flicker, casting amber pools on the frozen ground. The smell of smoke drifts from the infirmary chimney, perhaps Aelred brewing some winter tonic. You pause by the well, its rim dusted white, and peer into the darkness. The water reflects the stars, unmoving, eternal. You remember the heat of summer, the bees, the fragrance, the sweat on your brow, and realize how far you've traveled through the seasons. The garden has taught you more than herbs. It's taught you the patience of cycles, the humility of returning beginnings. You think of those first days, fumbling with a spade, and smile. The soil has taught you more theology than any sermon could. You hear the distant chanting of Compline, the day's last prayer, and the sound settles like warmth against the cold. The brothers' voices rise and fall, steady as the pulse of the year itself. The garden, sleeping under snow, feels like part of that chant, a silent verse in the monastery's endless hymn. Before returning inside, you kneel once more to brush snow from a single patch of sage. The leaves beneath are still alive, green and defiant. There you are, you whisper. Still breathing. The bells fade, and the night deepens. Frost gathers on the stone, sparkling like ground glass. You exhale, watching your breath drift upward like incense. For now, the garden sleeps, the world rests, and you, at least for this season, have learned the quiet holiness of waiting. The frost lingers longer each morning now, and yet you notice something stirring in the cold beds, a hint of life beneath the mulch, a faint green pulse. Brother Odo walks beside you, his sandals crunching over the half-frozen ground. Patience, he murmurs, is rewarded not just with sprouts, but surprises. He gestures toward a small clay jar sitting by the herb shed, sealed with wax and marked with an unfamiliar symbol. Today, he says, we open the world. You follow him inside, where the air smells of dust and dried rosemary. He sets the jar down, cracks the seal, and pours a handful of tiny, unfamiliar seeds into his palm. From Venice, he says reverently. They came in a spice merchant's cargo, tucked between bolts of silk and jars of cinnamon. You peer closer. The seeds glint faintly, almost golden. Saffron, you guess. Odo smiles. Indeed. Worth more than silver, and more troublesome than sin to grow in our climate. Here lies your mainstream historical fact. Saffron was one of medieval Europe's most prized imports, arriving from Persia, Spain, and the Levant along the same trade routes that carried frankincense and pepper. It was used to dye manuscripts, flavor food, and treat ailments ranging from melancholy to plague. Entire monasteries competed to cultivate it locally, often failing spectacularly. Odo pours the seeds into a linen pouch and ties it carefully. We trade prayers for spices, he says, half joking. Somehow, both end up enriching the soul. He leads you toward the apothecary's chamber. The shelves overflow with jars of strange origins: aloe de Arabia, Cinnamomum zeylanicum, zingiber. These are our pilgrims, Odo says. They travel farther than any monk ever will. You pick up a vial of pale powder and sniff cautiously. Ginger, he confirms. Brought by ship from lands where the sun burns straight through the year. The sailors tell stories of sea monsters and flying fish, but somehow the ginger always arrives unharmed. A novice enters, balancing a crate of dried bark. Casse, he explains proudly. Traded for honey and linen by pilgrims returning from the east. You run your hand along the rough edges. It smells faintly sweet, like cinnamon but darker, deeper. It's astonishing, you say, that a world we've never seen ends up steeping in our soup. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some medieval monasteries actually finance their repairs and scriptorium supplies through herb and spice trade. Records show Benedictine houses along the Rhine selling small sachets of saffron and pepper as sacred gifts, claiming, half seriously, that he who seasons the body seasons the soul. You can't help smirking. Holy spice rack entrepreneurship, you whisper. Odo grins. The Lord works in mysterious recipes. You follow him outside to the greenhouse, a rough wooden frame covered in oiled parchment, shimmering like amber in the weak sunlight. Inside, the air is warmer, thick with the scents of strange, imported soil. Rows of pots hold tender seedlings, basil, aloe, even a struggling citrus sapling. We call it the Garden of Strangers, Odo says softly. Each plant carries a rumor of faraway suns. He gently touches a young aloe's leaf. This one came through pilgrims returning from the Holy Land. They swore it healed wounds faster than prayer. Historians still argue whether it truly did, or whether faith simply helped the skin believe. You stroke the leaf. It's cool, plump, soothing. You believe both explanations equally. In the corner, a pot of cinnamon shoot struggles to stay alive. They never thrive here, Odo says, sighing. Our winters remind them they're too far from home. You nod. Maybe they dream of heat. Don't we all? He answers, rubbing his chilled hands. The Abbey's ledger records every import meticulously. 1 pound of pepper traded for 2 jars of honey, 3 ounces of saffron for a year's worth of parchment. You flip through the parchment, marveling at the precision. It's both accountancy and litany, proof that faith and commerce were less enemies than siblings. As the day warms, you help Odo prepare small seed beds for the exotic arrivals. He explains how they mix southern soil, clay and sand, with local earth to remind the plants of both homes. You wonder if monks ever felt the same, rooted in one world, longing quietly for another. He laughs as you sprinkle saffron corms into shallow trenches. Careful, he says, each of those could buy you a new roof tile, or eternal penance, depending on the abbot's mood. You smirk. So, priceless or perilous? Yes, he replies, deadpan. Nearby, Brother Aelred hums as he sorts dried nutmeg into jars. They say nutmeg protects against plague, he tells you. Or maybe it just makes the broth taste so good that you forget you're dying. You laugh, and he shrugs. Hope is a flavor too. When the afternoon bell rings, Odo invites you to the scriptorium. There, an illuminator sits hunched over a page depicting a palm tree bending gracefully. The caption reads Herba Arabiae. Tiny flecks of gold leaf glimmer like sunlight. We draw what we cannot visit, Odo murmurs. Art becomes our passport. Historians still argue whether such illustrations reflected accurate observation or pure imagination. After all, how many monks had actually seen a pepper vine or a date palm? Yet their drawings shaped Europe's understanding of distant flora for centuries, faith and artistry outpacing geography. By evening, the wind carries a hint of spice from the drying room. You sit near the fire, watching Odo grind cloves with a mortar and pestle. The rhythmic sound feels hypnotic, the air thick with warmth and sweet smoke. Imagine, he says, someone sailed halfway across the world so we could flavor cabbage. You grin. A noble cause if ever there was one. He leans back, eyes reflecting the firelight. Every seed, he says, is a message from somewhere else. Some whisper of deserts, some of jungles, some of home. We tend them all the same. That is the heart of the monastery, to make foreign things belong. Outside, the frost melts slowly into the earth, feeding the hidden roots. You step out briefly to breathe the night air. It smells faintly of cloves, snow, and smoke, a strange, comforting perfume of worlds intertwined. You realize that the monastic garden isn't just a sanctuary of herbs, it's an archive of the globe, a living map drawn in soil instead of ink. Each plant a pilgrim, each fragrance a border crossed. And you, by tending them, have become part of that quiet, fragrant diplomacy between faith and curiosity. As you return inside, Odo calls after you softly. Keep the saffron warm tonight. You smile. Understood. The monks believed that every seed carried the memory of its homeland. Perhaps warmth, then, is the gardener's greatest mercy. By now, the air in the abbey smells permanently of parchment and rosemary. The garden sleeps beneath thin snow, but inside, in the warmth of the scriptorium, the life of herbs continues, this time not in soil, but in ink. You sit with Brother Matthew, the illuminator, who has been tasked with recording the season's knowledge before memory fades or mildew eats the pages. Gardening, he mutters, is nothing without remembering. And memory, my friend, requires decoration. He dips a quill into bright green pigment ground from malachite, then traces a vine curling around the margin of a new page. Each leaf must teach something, he says, even if the reader never touches a spade. You watch, mesmerized, as tiny painted stems unfurl across the parchment like living tendrils. This, Odo tells you later, is the Herbarium Illuminatum, the illuminated herbal. Every abbey tries to make one, part encyclopedia, part prayer, part visual sermon. The drawings teach novices which plants to trust and which to flee from, their colors chosen with care. Gold for divine healing, red for danger, blue for mystery. Your mainstream historical fact blooms here. Monasteries were the primary centers for preserving botanical knowledge throughout the Middle Ages. Texts like De Materia Medica and Physica by Hildegard of Bingen were copied, glossed, and sometimes improved by countless monastic scribes. Their illuminations were not mere ornament, they were mnemonic devices, encoding herbal lore in a visual shorthand long before printing presses or plant photography. Brother Matthew gestures toward a half-finished page showing a stalk of lavender twined with delicate scrollwork. Smell this, he says, crushing a dried sprig between his fingers. You inhale, sweet, calming, ancient. Now, he continues, when you see this shade of violet, your mind will remember that scent. That's how we bind the senses to scripture. You can't help but chuckle. Medieval aromatherapy meets design thinking. Exactly, he replies. A divine UX. The hours drift like soft candle smoke. You help grind pigments, lapis for blue, ochre for yellow, soot for black. The rhythmic motion feels meditative, like turning compost but cleaner. Each color comes from a journey, lapis from Afghanistan, vermilion from Spain, carbon from last night's burnt sermon notes. Yes, apparently that happens more than you'd think. As Matthew paints, he hums the tones of Vespers. The lines on the page seem to move with the music, leaves swaying in rhythm. Art must breathe, he tells you. Even on dead calfskin. In the corner, Odo is leafing through an older manuscript. Its pages are cracked with age, edges darkened by centuries of fingertips. You glance over his shoulder and see an illustration of a plant labeled Mandragora humaniforma. The root does look oddly person-shaped. Our predecessors had vivid imaginations, Odo murmurs. Or vivid hallucinations. Historians still argue whether they ever saw real mandrakes or simply believed too hard. He turns another page, Salvia salvatrix. Sage, drawn with solemn precision. Beneath, in small Gothic script, a note reads, He who hath sage in his garden needeth not fear death. You smile faintly. Optimistic branding. And effective, Odo says. We've planted extra, just in case. A quirky tidbit surfaces like a worm after rain. Many monks signed their herbal drawings not with names but tiny symbols. Bees, suns, leaves, or even small snails. Partly out of humility, partly out of quiet rebellion against anonymity. One brother's works were so distinctively whimsical, tiny faces hidden in every leaf, that modern historians nicknamed him the graffiti monk. You half expect his ghost to doodle in the margins while no one's looking. Afternoon light slants through the arched windows, illuminating floating dust motes that look like drifting pollen. The sound of quills scratching parchment mixes with the occasional sneeze from all that dried herb dust. We preserve knowledge, Odo says softly, but the herbs preserve us. If our words rot, our gardens remind us of what we meant to say. He closes the old manuscript gently. You see, to copy a text is also to cultivate it. Every line grows differently in each scribe's hand. That's how wisdom evolves. You nod, thinking of your own clumsy first rose in the garden, each crooked stem its own act of translation. Outside, snow falls again, thick and silent. Brother Matthew lights another candle and paints a cluster of snowdrops in the corner of his page. To remind the reader that spring always returns, he says. We must illustrate hope, not just herbs. As evening deepens, the scriptorium becomes a small universe of flickering gold and whispering parchment. You notice the odd comfort of repetition. Grind, dip, paint, breathe. The monks have turned labor into lullaby. It's easy to imagine how centuries of hands could copy the same leaf shape, generation after generation, until the drawing itself became prayer. Historians still argue whether these illuminated herbals were more scientific than spiritual. Some see them as proto-botanical textbooks, others as devotional art disguised as study. You suspect both views miss the point. The monks didn't separate knowledge from worship. They sewed them together, like mint and marigold, to keep pests of doubt away. Brother Matthew finishes his page, sets the quill aside, and exhales. Perfection, he says, is for God. We settle for legibility. He hands you the page carefully. The lavender glows, the lines delicate as spider silk. You feel a strange pride, as though you've just harvested something living. Later, Odo joins you in the cloister corridor. Snow glitters in the torchlight, and he holds a single scrap of parchment toward you. On it, a simple sketch, your own hands cupping soil. Brother Matthew said the garden should remember you too, Odo explains. You stare at the drawing, crudely charming, the lines slightly wobbly but unmistakably yours. Beneath it, in careful script, Omnia herba decet patientime. Every herb teaches patience. You tuck it into your sleeve like a keepsake. The garden's lessons, now preserved not only in roots and stems but in strokes of ink, feel eternal. You realize that in a way, this is immortality, not grand or loud, but quiet and fragrant, bound between vellum and prayer. As you leave the scriptorium, the scent of ink lingers on your fingertips, sharp, earthy, and a little like sage. You smile, thinking how knowledge, like herbs, always leaves a trace. Morning mist drifts over the cloister garden like pale incense, curling through the arches and wrapping every stone in damp silence. The bells ring softly, one long, low note that hums through your ribs. Brother Odo beckons you toward the courtyard, where the monks gather with baskets of herbs and pitchers of water. Today, he says, the garden prays. You fall into step beside him, half curious, half reverent. The monks have told you of these rites before, the Benedictio Hortorum, the blessing of the gardens. It happens once each season, a reminder that every act of cultivation is also a conversation with heaven. The abbey has no need for grandeur. Its miracles grow quietly, leaf by leaf. The brothers form a line along the paths. Odo lifts a sprig of thyme like a scepter. We bless what we depend upon, he says, and what depends upon us. The abbot steps forward, his voice deep and calm. Latin phrases roll through the air, each syllable landing like dew on the herbs. Benedic, Domin, fructus terrae. Bless, O Lord, the fruits of the earth. The ritual feels ancient, older even than the stones beneath your feet. You catch the scent of wet soil and crushed mint as the abbot sprinkles holy water over the beds. The droplets glitter briefly before soaking in. So, Odo murmurs beside you, we baptize the basil. A tiny smile escapes you. Does it make the pesto holier? Undoubtedly, he says gravely. The Lord approves of flavor. Your mainstream historical fact sprouts here like a sturdy stalk. Throughout the medieval world, monasteries held regular agricultural blessings, often at Rogatiantide in spring or Lammas after harvest. These ceremonies fused pagan seasonal observances with Christian liturgy, transforming fertility rites into prayers for divine protection. In some records, monks even processed through the fields carrying relics, chanting psalms between rows of onions. The chant continues. Brother Aelred walks ahead, carrying a smoking censer filled with herbs instead of incense, sage, lavender, and juniper. The smoke curls into the cold air, sweet and sharp, drifting upward in lazy ribbons. You inhale deeply, and for a dizzy second, the garden feels alive in a new way, the air thick with prayer, the soil answering in silence. Every scent rises, Odo says softly. Every leaf listens. That's the secret. We pray with the herbs, not over them. You nod, sensing that he isn't speaking metaphorically. The ritual moves to the orchard, where the brothers circle a gnarled apple tree. Its bark glistens with dew. Its branches bear the last withered fruits of the season. The abbot blesses it with a steady hand. That tree, Odo whispers, was planted when I was a novice. It survived frost, lightning, and one overzealous brother with a pruning hook. Faith, you see, takes root deeper than fear. You can't resist. And deeper than incompetence. Odo chuckles. Precisely. After the final prayer, the monks disperse to their duties, leaving the garden damp but luminous. You linger by the fountain, watching ripples distort the reflection of the cloister arches. A small bird dips to drink. It feels like part of the ceremony too. Inside the infirmary, Brother Aelred prepares a mixture of blessed herbs for the sick. Faith strengthens medicine, he says, grinding valerian root. If the soul believes in healing, the body listens more closely. You wonder whether this is science or theology, or maybe just common sense spoken in Latin. A quirky tidbit stares. Some monasteries brewed holy waters infused with herbs, believed to cure both physical and spiritual ailments. Pilgrims carried vials of the stuff, convinced it would guard against plague or bad dreams. One recipe included thyme, rue, salt, and a whisper of Psalm 51 recited over the bowl. You picture medieval monks as proto-apothecaries of hope, bottling comfort and selling it for alms. Later that afternoon, the brothers gather again, this time to plant a few new cuttings, symbolic gestures of renewal. Odo hands you a small sprig of rosemary. Plant it near the cloister door, he instructs. It welcomes memory. You kneel, pressing the tiny plant into cool soil. Its scent releases instantly, sharp, clean, eternal. There, Odo says quietly, a prayer that will keep growing long after we stop. The sun finally breaks through the mist, spilling gold across the walls. The abbey stones seem to glow from within. This light, Odo muses, is what faith feels like after rain. You find yourself smiling without meaning to. Historians still argue whether such blessings were acts of superstition or symbolic mindfulness. Did holy water actually protect crops? Or was it merely the monks' way of expressing gratitude for another cycle survived? The debate feels almost beside the point. Watching Odo and the brothers hum low psalms while brushing soil from their hands, you sense that faith doesn't need to prove itself. It only needs to be practiced, like gardening. As evening descends, the brothers light small lanterns around the paths. Their glow flickers across the herbs, turning each leaf into a tiny ember. You walk among them slowly, careful not to disturb the peace that hangs like perfume. Odo appears beside you, holding 2 mugs of hot herbal brew. Chamomile and honey, he says. We drink it after every blessing. A ritual within a ritual. You sip. It's sweet, soothing, and slightly earthy. Tastes like forgiveness, you murmur. Exactly the recipe, Odo replies. You sit together on the low wall by the well. The night hums softly with insects and distant chant. We work, Odo says, because we must. We pray, because we choose. But when both happen at once, he trails off, gesturing toward the glowing herbs. That's when heaven feels close enough to harvest. The stars emerge, sharp against the dark. You catch their reflection in the well's surface and imagine the water blessing them back. The world seems to fold into itself, earth touching sky, faith touching soil. You think of all the times you've knelt in this garden, planting, pruning, worrying, hoping. Each act now feels like part of a larger, wordless liturgy. Perhaps that's what the monks have known all along, that the divine hides best in ordinary work, disguised as rosemary and doubt. Before you leave, Odo presses a small pouch into your palm. Seeds, he says. From the first time we ever blessed here. For when you have your own patch of earth. You tighten your fingers around it. And if I plant them? Then the story continues, he replies, eyes twinkling. And heaven will smell faintly of time. By the time spring should have returned, the air feels strangely hollow. The bells still ring, the chants still rise, but the garden, once a living hymn of color and scent, has fallen eerily silent. You walk its paths at dawn, and your boots stir nothing but dust. Where mint once burst through the cracks, there's only brittle stalks. Brother Odo stands near the fountain, now cracked and dry. He looks older, somehow smaller, like a tree that's weathered one winter too many. Change, he says quietly, has come faster than the seasons. At first, you think he means the frost. But when you step beyond the cloister wall, you see smoke in the valley. Soldiers. War has brushed against the abbey's edges, again. You remember the words carved over the gate, ora et labora. Pray and work. Now the work seems to be survival. A mainstream historical fact takes root in this bleak soil. By the late Middle Ages, many monastic gardens fell into neglect as wars, plague, and reform swept through Europe. The Benedictine rhythm of labor and prayer faltered under political storms. Fields went untended, herbs untended, walls left to crumble. Even holy soil couldn't resist the chaos of history. You help Odo salvage what he can. Together you carry sacks of seeds into the cellar, where the air is cool and still. They'll keep, he says. Seeds always do. Better than we will. He tries to sound dryly amused, but his voice cracks. Some brothers whisper of abandoning the abbey, seeking safety in nearby towns. Others stay, insisting that faith has weathered worse. The abbot orders rationing, grain, honey, even wax for candles. The garden, Odo mutters, will have to pray for itself. The weeds move in fast. Without constant tending, nettles and thistles reclaim the beds like forgotten kings returning to their throne. You bend to pull a handful, and their sting bites your skin. They are fierce, you say. Odo smiles grimly. They've been waiting centuries for this chance. A quirky tidbit rises among the ruins. During times of war or famine, some monks planted hunger herbs, wild greens like sorrel, dandelion, and goosefoot, to fill bellies when cultivated crops failed. There are stories of entire abbeys surviving on nettle broth and hope. Odo confirms this with a smirk. Nettle soup builds character. And possibly antibodies. The air thickens with uncertainty. Pilgrims stop coming, the spice jars grow empty. In the scriptorium, the pages curl from damp and neglect. You see Brother Matthew packing his pigments into small clay pots. If the worst comes, he says, I'll take the herbals and go east. Someone has to remember. His fingers tremble slightly as he closes the last jar. Historians still argue whether the decline of these gardens was inevitable. Some say monastic complacency and corruption invited reform. Others insist the world simply changed faster than the abbots could pray. Watching Odo stoop to gather the last of the withered sage, you feel the truth lies somewhere between sin and circumstance. One evening, wind tears through the courtyard, snapping what remains of the garden fence. You and a few brothers chase loose tiles and torn fabric in the dark. The storm howls like an organ out of tune. In the flickering light of your lantern, you glimpse Odo standing alone in the rain, whispering something you can't hear. When you reach him, he's pressing his hand to the soil. I'm telling it not to forget us, he says softly. Days blur into gray. The refectory grows colder, the prayers shorter, the laughter rarer. Yet every morning, Odo still visits the garden. He picks through the wreckage, pulling up weeds, salvaging a few herbs that dared to survive. Marjoram, wild garlic, a brave tuft of chamomile. He sets them in pots by the kitchen window. We tend what's left, he says. Always. One afternoon, you find him sketching the garden from memory on a scrap of parchment. The lines are shaky but tender. The well at center, the squared beds, the hedges that once bloomed with rosemary and rue. When they come to rebuild, he says, they'll know how it was. He glances up. Promise me you'll remember the smell of mint in spring. Someone should. That night, a messenger brings news. The abbey will be dissolved. The land, claimed. The brothers stare at the abbot in stunned silence. Odo simply nods, as if he'd already heard it whispered by the soil. All gardens end, he says. But seeds wander. You spend your last day packing bundles of dried herbs, carefully labeling each one, salvia, rosmarinus, thymus. Odo helps you tie them with string, then tucks small pouches of seeds into your robe. Wherever you go, he says, plant these. Don't build walls. Just grow. At dawn, the monks depart in silence. Some head toward nearby abbeys still standing, others toward distant villages. Odo lingers last. He kneels by the ruined well, scatters a handful of thyme, and whispers a blessing so quiet the wind nearly swallows it. Then he straightens, wipes his hands on his robe, and smiles faintly. Even weeds pray, he says. You look back one final time. The cloister arches still stand, though ivy creeps through the cracks. The air smells faintly of ash, rain, and, impossibly, mint. You think maybe the garden isn't dead, only dreaming again. A final gust of wind scatters your footprints as you walk down the hill. Behind you, the abbey disappears into the mist, but in your pocket, the seeds press softly against your palm, warm, alive, patient. You whisper to them, we'll find new soil. You find that new soil, though it takes years. The journey winds through valleys and across cold rivers, through towns that barely remember the rhythm of monastic bells. Yet everywhere you go, you notice how people still bend toward the earth. Herbalists in smoky huts, farmers marking the moons, widows drying lavender above their hearths. The spirit of the cloister garden has scattered like pollen, and you begin to see it sprouting in unexpected corners of the world. When you finally settle, it isn't behind stone walls or beneath an abbot's watchful eye. It's on the edge of a small village, beside a humble cottage that leans ever so slightly to one side. There, you press your thumb into a patch of bare ground and drop a seed of thyme, the one Odo gave you before the abbey fell silent. For a moment, you almost expect the old monk's voice to drift through the air. Tend what's left. So you do. You water, you weed, you wait. Weeks pass, then months, and when the first green sprig breaks through, it feels like a resurrection in miniature. The smell hits you, sharp, clean, stubborn, and you laugh out loud. Even heaven, you decide, would envy that fragrance. As the garden grows, so does your memory of what it meant to labor in faith. You recreate the cloister's geometry, not for discipline but for comfort. A square of mint near the door for welcome, rosemary by the window for remembrance, sage by the path for wisdom. No abbot dictates the order now, yet you find your hands follow the old rhythm naturally, prayer disguised as routine. A mainstream historical fact flourishes again in your thoughts. Though many medieval monasteries were dissolved or destroyed, their horticultural knowledge survived. Former monks became lay herbalists, gardeners to nobles, or teachers in universities. Their manuscripts and habits seeped quietly into Renaissance science, shaping medicine and botany for centuries. Even without their cloisters, the monks' gardens refused to die. One morning, a merchant passing through notices your rows of herbs and asks if you'll sell him some balm for a burn. You prepare it just as Brother Aelred once did, stirring beeswax and oil in a small pot, then crushing the leaves until their scent fills the air. That's remarkable, the merchant says. You must have trained somewhere fine. You smile faintly. A quiet place, you answer. Long gone, but not forgotten. A quirky tidbit blooms in your mind. Centuries after the last monastic gardens crumbled, people still believed that herbs grown on sacred ground held special virtue. Some travelers scraped bits of old abbey soil to mix with their seeds, hoping to borrow a blessing from the past. You suspect Odo would approve. A little holy dirt never hurt, he'd probably say. As years pass, your garden becomes something of a local curiosity. Villagers come for cuttings and advice. They don't know your history, but they sense something reverent in the way you touch the leaves, how you pause before harvesting even a sprig. They call you the quiet gardener, unaware they're repeating a title older than the stones of the abbey itself. Historians still argue whether modern herbalism owes its roots more to science or to the monks' meticulous devotion. But you, kneeling in your modest garden, know it was always both. The monks recorded what worked, but they also believed the plants listened. Perhaps that blend of observation and awe is what keeps herbs, and people, alive across the ages. On a summer evening, as fireflies blink over your rows of lavender, you find yourself whispering one of the old blessings. Benedic, Domin, fructus terrae. Bless, O Lord, the fruits of the earth. The words feel warm in your mouth, like honey. You imagine Odo somewhere nearby, still pruning ghostly basil in a garden of light, still muttering jokes about divine compost. The scent of thyme drifts through the air. The breeze hums like a remembered hymn. You realize that what you planted here isn't just herbs, it's continuity. Faith, patience, and curiosity, all woven together in living green. When travelers ask about your garden, you tell them stories, not of saints or miracles, but of hands in soil, of small acts of care that outlast kingdoms. Gardening, you say, is history with chlorophyll. They laugh, and you add, and good exercise, too. 3 centuries from now, someone else will probably quote you, thinking it a proverb. You'll take that as a compliment. Over time, the cottage leans a little more, your knees ache a little longer, but the garden remains. Each spring, new herbs volunteer themselves, offspring of the old seeds, still loyal, still fragrant. Sometimes you think they remember the chant, the soft murmur of monks blessing their ancestors' soil. Perhaps, in their own way, they do. One evening, as the sun sinks low and gold across your patch of earth, you kneel to gather rosemary. The air hums with bees and the faint ringing of faraway bells. You close your eyes and see the cloister arches again, the quiet faces of brothers long gone, and Odo smiling in the garden's half-light. His voice echoes softly in memory, even weeds pray. You smile. They still do, you whisper. And so do I. The air cools as twilight deepens, each sound softening into something almost tender. You sit back on your heels, feeling the earth still warm beneath your palms, the scent of crushed herbs rising like a sigh. The sky melts into slow purples and faded gold, the same colors that once brushed the cloister windows centuries ago. You take a slow breath. The garden hums quietly, the small, steady heartbeat of life persisting. Somewhere, far beyond the horizon, the old abbey stones crumble peacefully beneath moss, but their story endures here, whispered through time and sage. You let your hands rest on the soil, feeling its gentle pulse. This, you realize, was always the secret, not grand cathedrals or illuminated manuscripts, but small, faithful gestures repeated over time. Plant, water, wait, hope. The same rhythm that carried monks through centuries now carries you into stillness. The wind brushes your cheek. A few last bees drift home. The scent of rosemary lingers, sweet and sharp and comforting. You close your eyes, letting the world blur into a single, continuous breath. The lessons of the monastery fade into silence, but not absence. They've simply taken root within you. And as you drift toward sleep, you hear it again, a quiet whisper, soft as turning leaves. Tend what's left. The stars rise above your small patch of earth, and for a moment, the whole world feels like one vast, sleeping garden.